Under the blazing Arizona sun, a poor boy led a limping horse into an auction where laughter cut sharper than any whip. The rich man who once owned that horse smirked. Certain money could buy everything. But before the day was over, the boy and his broken friend would teach an entire town the price of dignity. The Arizona sun burned mercilessly over the open auction ground. Heat waves shimmered above the sand, turning the world into a blur of gold and dust. A crowd of ranchers, traders, and wealthy bidders gathered under the shade of canvas tents, fanning themselves while watching the parade of sleek horses. Each one strutted proudly, their coats glistening like polished bronze. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the dry air. $50,000, sold! Cheers rippled. Somewhere at the back, unnoticed, a thin boy stood beside a small, scarred horse. Tommy Reed's cap was too big for him. It kept slipping over his eyes as he led the gelding. Dusty. Forward. The horse's ribs showed through his dull gray coat, one foreleg slightly stiff with an old scar. People turned and stared, then laughed. "What's that thing doing here?" someone said. Tommy kept his eyes down. He'd been saving coins for months just to pay the entry fee. He didn't want to win. He just wanted Dusty to be seen. A sleek black car pulled up. The crowd parted as Richard Vail stepped out, his boots spotless, his hat perfectly angled. Everyone in Sierra Vista knew him, the millionaire rancher who owned half the land around here. Vail's gaze swept the dusty arena until it fell on Tommy and his horse. A smirk tugged at his lips. "Son," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "that creature belongs in a glue factory, not my auction." Laughter exploded. Tommy felt his cheeks burn. He wanted to defend Dusty, but his throat closed. The horse shifted, pressing his muzzle against the boy's shoulder as if to steady him. The crowd's laughter blurred into a distant roar. Somewhere near the fence, a few kids snickered. One threw a piece of straw at Dusty's flank. The horse didn't move. His good eye stayed fixed on something far away, something only he could see. Marla Reed watched from behind the wooden railings, her hands clenched around her worn apron. Her son had her stubbornness, and that frightened her. She'd worked as a farrier once, before her back injury ended that life. Now she could only watch, praying Tommy wouldn't say something that would make the men angrier. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "All right, folks, let's move on to the next horse." But Tommy's voice cut through. "Excuse me, sir, I'd like to enter the charity race at the end." Silence fell. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Vail arched an eyebrow. "The charity race? You want to ride that thing?" "Yes, sir," Tommy said softly. "He deserves one more run." For a moment, nobody laughed. Then Vail threw his head back. "Altio, right, boy. I like a good joke. Tell you what, if that bag of bones of yours crosses the finish line before mine, I'll buy him back from you for 10 times what he's worth." The crowd roared again, half amused, half thrilled by the arrogance of it all. Tommy just nodded. "Deal." When the laughter died down, Vail leaned closer, his voice low but sharp. "You'll learn, boy. Out here, everything and everyone has a price. Remember that." He turned, walking away, the dust swirling behind his boots like smoke. Tommy stood still, his pulse hammering in his chest. He could feel every eye on him, every whisper of pity or mockery. Then he looked at Dusty. The horse's head hung low, but his ears flicked toward the boy's voice. Tommy reached up and touched the scarred neck. "Don't listen to them," he murmured. "We just have to run once more, that's all." The horse snorted softly, and for the briefest second, the dull gray of his coat caught the light, like the ghost of silver trying to break through. The boy smiled faintly. Maybe that was enough for now. As the crowd moved on, Marla approached, her steps slow. "Tommy," she whispered, "you don't have to do this." He met her eyes. "I'm not doing it for them, Mom." He looked back toward the track, where the afternoon light turned the dust into drifting gold. "I'm doing it for him." Far across the lot, Richard Vale glanced back over his shoulder, amused. He muttered to his assistant, "That horse won't make it past the first corner." But when he turned away, he missed the small thing that happened next. Dusty lifted his head for the first time, ears pricked forward, and exhaled hard into the hot wind, like he'd just remembered what running felt like. The sun began to sink lower, staining the sky the color of fire. The day ended the way it had begun. Dust, laughter, and the faint scent of hope hiding beneath it all. The night settled over Sierra Vista like a worn blanket, stitched with crickets and the faint whistle of desert wind. The auction grounds were quiet now. Only the echo of laughter lingered, drifting through the wooden fences. Tommy walked beside Dusty toward the small shack he and his mother called home. The horse limped slightly, his injured leg leaving uneven prints in the sand. Tommy kept one hand on his neck, his other gripping the rope loosely, as if afraid that letting go might mean losing him forever. Their home was no more than a single-room shed near the edge of the dry creek. A dim lamp glowed through a cracked window. Inside, Marla Reed sat by the table sorting through a handful of coins, the week's pay from shoeing horses at a nearby ranch. Her back ached, and every movement drew a soft groan she tried to hide. When Tommy entered, her face brightened, then quickly fell as she saw the exhaustion in her son's eyes. "You didn't have to stay that long," she said. "I wanted to see what they'd pay for the stallion Vale brought in," he replied, placing his hat on the hook. "He went for $50,000. Marla tried to smile. "That's more than this house, the land, and our luck put together." Tommy shrugged. "Dusty's worth more than all of it." She sighed. "Honey, love doesn't buy hay." But the moment she said it, her voice cracked. The boy didn't argue. He just went outside, into the cooling desert air, where the stars hung low and wide. Dusty stood in the moonlight, his shadow stretched thin across the dirt. Tommy ran his hand along the horse's neck. "They laughed at you today," he whispered. "But you didn't flinch. You just stood there. You're braver than they'll ever be." The horse flicked his tail, snorted, and lowered his head into the boy's chest. Tommy closed his eyes, letting the warmth of that trust seep in. Later, when Marla came to the doorway, she found her son curled up beside the horse, asleep in the dust. She hesitated, then draped an old blanket over him. Her heart twisted with pride and fear, pride because she saw in Tommy the same quiet fire she once had. Fear because she knew how easily the world could snuff it out. At dawn, the first rays of sun spilled across the desert floor. Tommy awoke to the sound of hooves, someone riding fast. He scrambled up, spotting a rider cutting through the morning haze. It was Jake Nolan, a ranch hand from Vale's property. He slowed near the fence, his expression unreadable. "The boss says you got guts, kid," Jake said. "But guts don't win races. Money does." He tossed something into the dirt. It was a broken horseshoe, twisted and useless. He says you'll need luck more than that nag's got legs. Tommy picked up the shoe, brushing off the dust. Luck's for people who quit, he said quietly. The man gave a short laugh and rode off, leaving only the trail of hooves echoing through the still air. Inside, Marla packed a small tin of oats. If you're serious about this race, she said, not looking at him, you'll need to train. But don't do it to prove that man wrong. Do it for something worth believing in. Tommy tied the oats to the saddle and nodded. I already am. He spent the rest of the day near the dry riverbed, coaxing Dusty into slow jogs. The horse stumbled often, his front leg shaking each time. Easy, boy, Tommy murmured. We'll start small. He had no stopwatch, no fancy gear, just patience and the echo of his father's old saying, you don't fix a horse by forcing it. You fix it by letting it remember who it was. As the afternoon burned gold, Dusty began to respond. Step by step, his rhythm steadied. The limp became less pronounced. Tommy learned to read every twitch of muscle, every flick of the ear. He didn't demand speed. He searched for harmony. Each stride felt like a quiet conversation between boy and horse. One learning courage, the other forgiveness. When evening came, Marla brought him water and sat nearby, her back against a post. The air shimmered with orange light. You think people can change, Tommy? She asked. He looked up from brushing Dusty's mane. Maybe not, but I think horses can remind them how. She smiled faintly. Then maybe there's hope for us too. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain from far away. Tommy glanced toward the horizon, where the mountains turned violet under the sinking sun. He's getting stronger, he said. Strong enough to beat Vale? She asked softly. Tommy didn't answer. He just looked at Dusty, who was pawing gently at the dirt, and said, strong enough to try. That night, the rain finally came, soft, fleeting, like mercy. Drops pattered against the tin roof as Tommy sat by the window, watching Dusty stand beneath the downpour. The horse lifted his face to the sky, letting the water wash the dust from his coat. For the first time, the gray shimmered faintly, like the color of hope trying to return. Tommy whispered to the darkness, We'll make them see you, Dusty. One way or another. Outside, lightning flashed across the plains, splitting the horizon in white fire. The boy's reflection glowed for a heartbeat in the glass, eyes bright with belief, mouth set in quiet resolve. And far across town, Richard Vale stood on his veranda, swirling a glass of bourbon, staring toward the same storm. That boy, he muttered to himself, doesn't know when to quit. Then, with a smirk, he added, Good. It'll make his fall all the more satisfying. The thunder rolled away, leaving only the steady sound of rain, and somewhere between them, boy, horse, and storm, something unseen began to stir. Morning sun steamed off the puddles the storm had left behind, turning the auction yard into a mirror of broken sky. By noon, the mirrors were gone, and the dust returned, as if the rain had only dreamed itself into this place. Word spread faster than the wind. The millionaire had taunted the boy, and the boy hadn't flinched. Men drifted back to the rails with coffee in paper cups. Women shaded their eyes with wide-brim hats. Kids scrambled up the bleachers for a better look. Even the auctioneer, who'd vowed to keep things strictly business, couldn't resist the heat of a spectacle. Richard Vale arrived late, the way men who own the clock often do. He stepped from the black car with a smile polished to a shine. Ladies and gentlemen, he called, Before we resume, a moment of entertainment." His voice rolled across the arena like a radio announcer selling a dream. "This afternoon's charity race, tradition in Sierra Vista, will be enhanced." Laughter. "A young man believes his horse can outrun mine. I believe in supporting local courage, so I'll match every donation dollar for dollar if he dares ride." Tommy stood inside the gate, Dusty's rope in his hand, heart thudding so hard he thought the crowd could hear it. He'd planned to disappear, to train quietly by the creek until race day. Now there was no quiet left. He felt Marla's hand at his shoulder. Her grip was steadier than her voice. "We can walk away, baby." Vale's assistant, a narrow man with a clipboard and a cologne that smelled expensive enough to insure, approached with a smile too white for the desert. "Simple paperwork." He flipped the top sheet. "Liability waiver, veterinary consent, helmet requirement. Safety first." He leaned in, dropping his voice. "Smart to have health insurance, too. Ambulances aren't cheap." The words carried the cool threat of a personal injury attorney ad. Tommy swallowed, signed where the man tapped, and tried not to think about premiums Marla could never pay. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Some faces were eager for a show. Some held a softness Tommy chose not to meet, because tenderness can crack resolve faster than cruelty. Vale tilted his hat. "Since we're all friends," he said, "let's make this fair. The course is 1 lap around the outer rail, start at the north gate, finish at the banner. No whips allowed. Wouldn't want to upset the donors. As for stakes..." He paused, letting the silence lengthen until it started to ache. "If the boy's horse wins, I'll buy him back at 10 times his auction value. If he loses, he surrenders the animal to my ranch for proper care." The last 2 words slid across the sand like a blade. Tommy felt heat rush to his face. "Dusty's not yours," he said, but the words came out smaller than he'd intended. Vale smiled as if the boy had proven his point for him. "Everything becomes someone's, son. That's how land is measured and fortunes are made." He turned to the crowd. "All for charity, of course." A hat passed through the bleachers. Bills fluttered in. 5s, 10s, a crumpled 20. Sierra Vista had a way of giving even when the cupboards were thin. Tommy watched the money multiply and felt a strange mix of gratitude and dread. He didn't want to win their pity. He wanted to win back the thing no one could donate: Dusty's right to be seen. He led the horse to a quiet corner by the fence. Dusty lowered his head, chewing the bit he no longer wore, a ghost habit from a harsher time. Tommy stroked the scar on the foreleg, tracing the ridge as if reading Braille for a message he kept missing. "I won't let him take you," he whispered. Dusty nudged his shoulder, then exhaled a long, low breath that warmed the boy's ribs. The sound steadied him more than any promise. Marla hovered near, rubbing her lower back, a pain she had learned to keep private. "I talked to Pastor Ellis," she said, eyes on the dirt. "He thinks we can raise enough for hay with the church pantry, maybe even help with the..." She stopped, caught between pride and need. "The mortgage is a month late again." She laughed softly, a brittle sound. "Another letter from the bank. Colored paper like it's a carnival." Tommy nodded, ashamed and stubborn at once. "I'll find more work," he said. "I can shoe at Rubens after school, maybe stack feed at the co-op." He didn't say the part about the credit card they'd used for the last vet visit, or the car insurance payment that kept the old truck legal by sheer will. Grown-up words were trying to crowd a boy's mouth, and he hated how they tasted. The auctioneer clapped his hands for attention. "Vet check!" A woman in a khaki vest approached with a stethoscope and a gentle touch. She palpated Dusty's leg, checked his eye, listened to his lungs. "Scar tissue's old," she said. "Gait's uneven but serviceable. If you ride smart and slow, he'll be fine." She looked at Tommy a beat longer. "You know what smart means, right?" "Don't let pride do the steering," he answered. Her smile reached her eyes. "Good. Then you know more than most." Vale mounted his stallion, a black arc of muscle and shine. The animal danced under him, restless, teeth flashing white when the bit caught the light. The crowd leaned forward as if gravity had shifted toward the gate. Tommy slid his helmet on. Marla tightened the chin strap, hands trembling just once. "If something happens, if you fall, promise you'll roll away." "I promise." "And if nothing happens," she added, voice steadier, "promise you'll still be my boy." "That part stays," he said, and the words settled inside him like a lodestar. They trotted to the north gate for a trial start. Not the race, just a test, the auctioneer said, to ensure things were orderly and dignified. Tommy saw Vale's mouth twitch at the second word. Dusty's ears flicked between the crowd and the track, catching 100 noises and choosing none. Tommy leaned forward and breathed slow, the way he'd taught himself beside the creek. In for 4. Hold for 2. Out for 4. The horse's back lifted under him, a small tide rising. A pistol popped to signal the practice run. Vale shot forward like a loosed arrow. Dusty started late, startled but willing. Tommy didn't chase. He pointed the gelding down the rail, let him find a pace that wasn't pain. Halfway down the stretch, the stallion's lead was a poem about money. Long, smooth, inevitable. Vale flashed a grin at the stands, basking in the hum he could bend at will. Tommy kept his eyes on the ground a few feet ahead, searching for divots that could twist an old injury into a new disaster. They eased up before the finish, just as planned. The crowd clapped politely. A young woman in a denim jacket called out, "Go, kid!" And the call turned into a scatter of voices that sounded almost like faith. Vale doffed his hat. "Don't worry, folks. We'll make a proper show of it at 3. Then, lower, only loud enough for the boy. "If you want to back out, no shame in it. You can still return that nag to the best savings account you've got, your memories." Tommy smiled without teeth. "Memories don't eat," he said. "Horses do." By mid-afternoon, the bleachers filled to their ribs. Vendors rolled in with sodas sweating through paper cups. A radio played old country hits, the kind that made men remember their fathers without saying so. The banner at the finish line snapped in the breeze. Sierra Vista Charity Day. Ride with heart. Tommy led Dusty to the water trough and let him drink slowly. When the horse lifted his head, droplets jeweled his muzzle like a cheap crown. The boy wiped them away with the corner of his shirt. 5 minutes, the auctioneer called. "Riders to the gate." Marla kissed her son's temple, the way she had when he was small enough to carry. "If you feel him falter, I'll listen," Tommy said. "I swear." She nodded, swallowing whatever else needed saying. He tightened the cinch a final hole. The leather creaked, a familiar prayer. Somewhere behind him, laughter tangled with the smell of kettle corn and sunburn. He swung into the saddle, and all the noise dropped a notch, like the arena itself had leaned closer. Dusty shifted, then stilled at a touch of the boy's hand. Tommy ran his palm along the ridge of the mane, feeling the tiny nicks from a life lived hard and unchosen. "He doesn't own you," he whispered. "Not today." A gust stirred the flags. Silence pooled at the gate, heavy and bright. The moment had the clarity of truth cut thin enough to bleed. And in that brightness, from the shadow of the far fence, a gravelly voice drifted over the rail. "You're talking wrong to him, kid." Tommy turned, searching for the speaker. Only a weathered shape in a brimmed hat, smoke curling up like a spare line of scripture. Dusty's ears twitched toward the sound, as if he recognized a language older than reins and spurs. "Who are you?" Tommy asked the shadows, the question hanging just long enough to become the next breath he would take. The man stepped from the shadow like a figure drawn out of smoke. His boots sank into the sand without sound, his face hidden beneath a weathered hat that had seen more sun than shade. The crowd's noise dimmed behind them, lost in the slow hum of the desert wind. Tommy blinked. "Who are you?" he asked again. The stranger struck a match against his belt buckle and lit a hand-rolled cigarette. The flare showed eyes the color of rust and memory. "Name's Earl Nolan," he said. "Used to break horses before the rich folks learned to break men instead." He nodded toward Dusty. "That gelding of yours, he listens better than most people I've met. You talk to him like you're begging. Stop doing that." Tommy frowned. "I'm not begging." "You're asking for permission," the old man said. "A horse don't need permission to trust. He needs proof." The words fell heavy and true. Tommy looked at Dusty, then back at the man. "How would you know?" Earl spat into the sand, the sound like punctuation. "Because I trained him once. Before he got that scar." The boy froze. "You mean, he belonged to Vale?" Earl's gaze didn't waver. "Every beast in that man's stable belonged to him one way or another. But Dusty, back then they called him Stormline, had more fire than Vale could handle. The man don't ride, he controls. Difference is subtle till it breaks something." He inhaled smoke, the ember flaring like a heartbeat. "Broke the horse's leg for losing a race Vale thought was his birthright. Then had him sold to a slaughter lot." Tommy's stomach twisted. He reached instinctively for Dusty's neck, the same neck that once bore a cruel hand. The gelding shifted closer, sensing the boy's turmoil. "How'd you know he was still alive?" "I didn't," Earl said. "Till I heard a kid was bringing a one-eyed ghost to an auction. Figured I'd come see if ghosts could still run." A gust of wind sent sand swirling through the corral. The boy looked down, thinking. "He still wants to run," Tommy said quietly. Earl's eyes softened. "Then you better learn how to let him." They stood together in silence for a moment, the air buzzing with the low hum of insects and electricity from the sun. Earl flicked his cigarette aside. "Meet me by the old rail yard at dawn," he said. "Bring him and a rope. No saddle." Tommy hesitated. "Why?" "Because if you want him to trust you, you've got to get off his back first." When Earl walked away, the dust swallowed him like a secret. That night, Tommy couldn't sleep. The image of the old man lingered in his head, along with the revelation that Dusty carried Vale's cruelty in every step. He sat by the window, watching lightning flicker behind the distant mountains. Inside, Marla slept on the couch, one hand curled over an unpaid electricity bill. Tommy whispered, "I'll fix it, Mom. I'll fix everything." He didn't know how, but saying it aloud made the promise real. At dawn, he led Dusty to the rail yard. The place was half collapsed, old timber creaking under the weight of silence. Earl waited, perched on a fence post, a tin mug of coffee steaming in his hand. "Thought you might sleep in," he said. "Couldn't." "Good. Tired boys listen better." Earl dropped lightly to the ground and looped a rope into a loose circle. "First lesson? Stop thinking about winning." Winning makes your body lie. Horses know when you lie. Tommy nodded, unsure. Earl stepped close to Dusty, who flinched at the smell of smoke. The old man froze, hands open. "Still remembers," he murmured. "Don't blame him. Pain's got a long memory." He took a slow breath, then walked around the horse in a wide arc, eyes never leaving his flank. "See the ears? Pointed at me but not back. That's conversation, not fear." Tommy watched, absorbing every movement. "He listens to you." Earl chuckled. "No, I listen to him. Always start there." They worked for hours under a pale sun. Earl showed him how to mirror the horse's rhythm. Walk when Dusty walked, stop when Dusty stopped. Every time the boy rushed, Dusty stiffened. Every time he matched the horse's breath, Dusty's shoulders dropped. It was like learning a song with no words. By noon, sweat darkened Tommy's shirt, and the horse's sides were streaked with salt. Earl poured water from a canteen, handing it to the boy. "He ain't broken," he said. "Just forgot what freedom feels like." Tommy nodded, wiping his mouth. "So did I, maybe." Earl's smile was thin and real. "Then you two might just heal each other." They took a break under the shadow of an old freight car. Earl dug out a small metal tin, revealing a photo inside. A younger man with the same eyes, standing beside a horse that looked like Dusty before the scars. "That was me and him," Earl said, "before Vale thought money could buy silence." Tommy studied the image, his throat tight. "He remembers you." Earl looked away, voice rough. "Maybe. Or maybe he just remembers what it felt like to be seen." When the afternoon wind rose, Earl stood. "Tomorrow, we start teaching him balance. He'll stumble, maybe fall. You too. But remember, never use your heels or the rope to force him forward. You breathe, he moves." Tommy smiled, tired but glowing. "I'll be here." "I know." Earl placed a hand on Dusty's neck, then on the boy's shoulder. "One more thing. Vale's not just racing you, son. He's racing what he did to that horse. Make sure he loses twice." As the old man walked away, Tommy stayed, brushing the horse until the sun sank low, and the world turned copper. When he finally led Dusty home, the gelding moved smoother than before, each limp, less pronounced, like trust was oiling the rust of his bones. Marla watched them from the doorway, the fading light catching in her hair. "You were gone all day," she said. "Learning," Tommy replied. "From who?" He looked back toward the rail yard, where the wind still carried the faint smell of tobacco and dust. "Someone who used to believe in horses." He smiled then, a quiet, private smile. And though she didn't understand it, Marla smiled too. Inside the shed, the radio hummed a low country tune about lost chances and second wins. Tommy sat near the open door, polishing Dusty's old bit with a rag. He didn't know if he'd use it again. Maybe Earl was right. Maybe the horse didn't need a bit anymore. Maybe neither of them did. Far off, Vale's ranch lights glimmered against the horizon like a challenge waiting to be answered. The boy whispered to the dark, "Tomorrow, we start running." And in the corral, Dusty lifted his head at the sound, ears pricked toward the coming dawn. The next morning dawned, clean and white over Sierra Vista, the kind of light that erases the scars of the night before. Tommy led Dusty down to the dry riverbed, rope loose in his hand, while the wind pushed fine red sand across their path. Earl was already there, perched on an overturned bucket with a thermos of coffee and a grin that looked carved from the desert itself. "You came back," he said. "I said I would," Tommy replied. "Most folks don't keep promises they make before sunrise." The boy smiled faintly, tightening Dusty's halter. The horse's coat had begun to shine again under the layers of brushed-out dirt, his ribs no longer as sharp. The limp was still there, but softer now, like a memory being forgotten. Earl tossed the empty cup aside. "All right, kid. Let's see what you two remember." The morning filled with rhythm, the crunch of hooves, the boy's steady breathing, the low whistle Earl used to cue the turns. Dusty moved uncertainly at first, dragging his leg through the loose sand. But Tommy didn't push. He listened, breathing in time, letting the horse find his own balance. Every few steps, he murmured something. A word, a hum, sometimes just the horse's name. Dusty's ears flicked toward him each time, and slowly, the distance between command and understanding began to close. By mid-morning, the air shimmered with heat. Tommy removed his shirt and wrapped it around Dusty's neck, protecting the scar from the sun. Earl nodded approvingly. "You're learning," he said. "It ain't about showing power. It's about showing respect." The boy grinned. "That's what my mom says about people." "She sounds smarter than most cowboys I know." They kept training until the sun climbed high. Dust rose around them, thick enough to paint the light amber. Tommy's legs ached, and his throat burned from thirst, but when he looked at Dusty, head lifted, stride steady, he forgot the pain. Each time the horse stumbled, he corrected himself faster. Each fall turned into something stronger. "Again," Earl called. "But this time, drop the rope." Tommy hesitated. "He'll run off." "No," the old man said. "He'll run free. There's a difference." Tommy loosened his grip and let the rope slide to the ground. For a moment, Dusty froze. Then he trotted forward on his own, circling wide before returning to the boy's side. Earl laughed, a sound rough as gravel but filled with pride. "See? He don't need your hand to remember who he is." The boy wiped sweat from his face. "So that's how you trained him before Vale?" Earl's eyes went distant. "Yeah, till Vale decided the whip was faster than patience." Silence hung between them. The desert wind carried the faint buzz of cicadas, endless and ancient. Tommy knelt and touched Dusty's hoof, whispering something so soft Earl couldn't catch it. When he stood again, there was a steadiness in his posture the old man hadn't seen before. As the afternoon waned, Marla arrived with a jug of lemonade and a folded newspaper. "You two have been out here all day," she said, setting the jug on a rock. "You'll cook alive." She wiped Dusty's muzzle with a damp cloth, motherly but gentle. Her gaze caught the headline, "Local Millionaire sponsors charity race to support youth programs." A photo beneath showed Vale shaking hands with the mayor, his smile a politician's kind of kindness. Marla snorted softly. "He's turning your race into publicity." Earl took the paper, squinting at it. "He's always known how to turn cruelty into tax deduction." Tommy frowned. "Doesn't matter. We're still running." Marla looked at her son, the sunburnt face, the blisters on his palms, and sighed. "I wish your father could see you now." Tommy's throat tightened. "He'd tell me to fix the fence before dinner." Earl chuckled. "Then fix it fast, boy. We've got work tomorrow." That night, the town buzzed with gossip. At the diner, old ranchers argued over whether Vale would crush the boy or if that kid with the busted horse might pull off a miracle. At the gas station, a clerk pinned a flyer on the bulletin board. Charity race, Saturday 3 p.m. All proceeds to the children's home. Underneath, someone scribbled in pen, "Go, Tommy." Tommy didn't hear any of it. Back home, he sat beside Dusty under the stars, polishing the horse's hooves with oil Earl had given him. The smell of leather, sweat, and dust mixed into something sacred. "We're getting better," he said softly. "You're starting to look like you used to." The horse shifted, lowering his head until his muzzle brushed the boy's hair. The gesture was so tender, it almost hurt. Across the yard, the faint glow of Marla's old laptop flickered through the window as she searched for ways to refinance their tiny house. On the screen, ads popped up: mortgage relief program, debt consolidation loan, auto insurance quotes. She sighed, clicking past them all. In the doorway, she could hear her son humming to the horse, and for the first time in years, she let herself believe they might outrun despair. Over the next few days, Tommy's world became a rhythm of sunrise and sweat. He ran beside Dusty through the canyons, over shallow creeks, and across the open plains until their shadows stretched into one. Earl watched from the fence, a silent sentinel. Sometimes he gave advice. Sometimes he said nothing at all. "Silence teaches better than shouting," he told the boy once. "Even the best life coach charges too much for that lesson." On Friday, the day before the race, the sky turned orange and heavy. Tommy led Dusty up a low ridge overlooking Vale's ranch. Below them sprawled acres of perfection: green fields, white fences, and horses worth more than their entire town. Dusty snorted, uneasy. "That's where you came from," Tommy whispered. "That's where we're going, back." He took a deep breath, tasting iron and dust. "Tomorrow, you don't have to win, boy. You just have to run the way you were meant to." As they turned back toward home, lightning flashed far to the west. Earl's voice echoed in Tommy's memory. "Don't use your heels or your hands, just your breath." He repeated it like a prayer all the way down the hill. By the time they reached the corral, the stars had come out, and Marla was waiting with 2 sandwiches and a tired smile. "One more day," she said. "One more," Tommy agreed, stroking Dusty's neck. The horse leaned into the touch, eyes half closed. When they went inside, Earl was already sitting at the table, hat in his lap. "Hope you two are ready," he said. "Tomorrow's not just a race, it's a reckoning." Tommy met his gaze. "For who?" Earl smiled without mirth. "For everyone who forgot that money don't measure worth." Outside, the wind rose again, scattering dust into the air. In the dim moonlight, Dusty stood alone by the fence, mane rippling like smoke. He pawed the earth once, steady, deliberate, and the sound carried through the night like a promise kept. By the time Friday turned to dusk, Sierra Vista glowed in the hush before a storm. The sun had bled out into the horizon, leaving streaks of rust and violet across the desert. Tommy sat outside the barn, sharpening Dusty's old horseshoe with a file that sang softly against the metal. The world around him was quiet. Too quiet. Even the cicadas seemed to be holding their breath. Inside, Dusty shifted in his stall, restless. His coat shimmered with a faint sheen, a sign of both health and worry. Tommy walked in, brushing straw from the horse's back. "Tomorrow's our day, boy," he whispered. "We don't need to prove anything. We just need to show up." Earl appeared in the doorway, a dark shape framed by the dying light. "You say that now," he said, "but when the crowd starts hollering, You'll feel their eyes on your back. Don't let it twist your gut." Tommy smiled. "I'll remember." Earl nodded and leaned against the wall. "Remember this too. Horses pick up what you carry inside. Fear, pride, anger. They'll feel it before you do. Walk in calm, he'll walk in calm. Walk in scared, he'll fall." Tommy nodded again. Though his heart was already pounding, he tried to laugh. "Guess that means I shouldn't eat anything spicy tonight." Earl chuckled, the sound dry and warm. "You'll do fine, kid." The old man turned serious, his eyes softening. "There's something I should tell you before tomorrow." He reached into his pocket and unfolded a torn photograph. It showed a younger Earl, standing beside a proud, gleaming stallion, dusty before the scars. "I took this the day before Vale broke him. I tried to stop it, but I worked for the man. Didn't have the guts to walk away. Been regretting it ever since." Tommy stared at the picture, tracing the outlines of the horse. "He forgave you," he said. "You're helping him now." Earl shook his head. "Forgiveness don't erase the past, but sometimes it lets us breathe around it." He handed the photo to Tommy. "Keep it. It's his truth. And maybe yours." Outside, lightning flickered on the far edge of the desert. The air smelled of sage and electricity. Marla came out of the house with a plate of cornbread and a thermos of tea. "You two planning to talk all night?" she teased softly. But her eyes were damp. She'd been reading the bills again, counting the days till rent. Earl stood and tipped his hat. "Ma'am, your boy's got more heart than any man I've met. You raised him right." Marla smiled tiredly. "He raised me too, I think." They sat together near the fence, sharing food in silence. Dusty nickered softly, lowering his head to the boy's shoulder. The wind carried the smell of rain closer now. Marla looked toward the glowing windows of Vale's mansion across the valley. "He's already celebrating," she murmured. "You can see the lights. Probably has photographers waiting." Earl spat into the dirt. "That man throws money at everything so no one notices what it costs him. Don't envy that." Tommy took a bite of cornbread and nodded. "I don't envy him. I just want him to see Dusty as more than what he broke." Earl gave a slow smile. "That's the right kind of revenge." The evening deepened. When Marla went inside, Tommy stayed by the fence. The night hummed with crickets and thunder. He pressed the photograph against Dusty's neck. "You were beautiful once," he whispered. "You still are." The horse turned, eyes reflecting the lantern's glow like polished amber. Earl cleared his throat. "One more thing before I go. Tomorrow, don't let him run for you. Let him run for himself. You'll know when that moment comes. It'll feel like flying without wings." Tommy nodded. "I'll try." "Don't try," the old man said softly. "Listen." When Earl disappeared into the dark, Tommy led Dusty into the open yard. The moon was rising now, round, enormous, a silver coin hanging above the desert. The boy loosened the halter and whispered, "Run if you want." Dusty hesitated, then started at a slow trot, hooves striking sparks from the stones. The rhythm grew into a gallop. His silhouette crossed the moonlight, fierce and alive, his mane streaming behind him like smoke. Tommy watched, breathless. The wind whipped his hair, and for a moment it felt as though he were running too, every beat of Dusty's heart syncing with his own. When the horse slowed and came back, the boy met him halfway. They stood nose to forehead, breathing in the same rhythm. From the house, Marla called softly, "Tommy, it's late." "Coming, Mom," he said, but he didn't move right away. He rested a hand on Dusty's neck. Tomorrow, no fear. Just faith, he said, turned toward the house, the lantern light outlining his thin frame, and for a second the boy looked older than his years. Inside, he found his mother sitting by the window, an envelope in her lap. "It's from the state," she said quietly. "They're offering to buy out the land for a highway project. It could clear our debts." Tommy's heart jumped. "You mean sell the farm?" She nodded, eyes on the floor. "If you lose tomorrow, maybe we should. Maybe it's time." He knelt beside her, taking her hand. "Let me run first. Let us run." Marla met his gaze and saw something unbreakable in it, the same light she'd seen in his father once. She nodded. "Then run." Later, long after she'd gone to bed, Tommy lay awake listening to the storm gather beyond the hills. The roof creaked, thunder rolled, and rain began to fall again. Each drop hit the tin roof like a heartbeat. He reached under his pillow and pulled out Earl's photo, the edges soft with age. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we bring him home." Outside, Dusty stamped his hoof once and whinnied low, as if answering. And far away, in his mansion of glass and gold, Richard Vale stood by his window, swirling a drink and watching the storm. His reflection wavered in the glass, older and harder. He raised his glass in the dark. "Let's see what you've got, kid." Lightning tore the sky open, white and sharp. For a brief moment, both man and boy looked out at the same storm, neither knowing that by tomorrow's end, everything they believed about worth and pride would change. Morning came rinsed and new, the desert polished by the night's storm. Sierra Vista woke early, drawn to the auction grounds as if the town itself had a pulse that beat toward the rail. Canvas tents flapped, bleachers filled, and the smell of kettle corn tangled with wet dust and leather. Tommy walked Dusty through the gate at a slow, steady jog, feeling the gelding's breath warm against his sleeve. The leg with the scar moved clean at the walk, careful, measured, willing. No fear, just faith, he reminded himself, carrying last night's moonlight like a secret in his chest. Vendors hawked sodas, churros, and sun hats. A portable speaker cracked with the announcer's voice, something between county fair and Sunday sermon. Sponsors were thanked. Banners glittered with names that made the town look richer than it was. A radio jingle chirped from the PA about home insurance and retirement planning, cheerful as confetti. Tommy let the words pass through him like wind. Beside him, Marla fixed the chin strap on his helmet with hands that refused to show their tremor. "If he shortens his stride, breathe with him," she whispered. "If he trips, loosen your hips and carry less weight." She kissed his temple. "I'll be right there." Earl was already on the rail, boot heel hooked on a lower board, hat tilted to shade his eyes. He gave a two-fingered salute. "Remember the song? Without words," he said. "The one you learned down in the riverbed." Tommy nodded. Dusty tipped an ear toward the old man's voice, then toward the track, choosing the track. Across the infield, photographers clustered near the fancy tent, where Richard Vale entertained the mayor with cold drinks and colder charm. Vale's stallion, ink black, corded, mazhet, immaculate, arched his neck beneath the hands of a groom. When Vale swung into the saddle, applause rose like heat. He rode a slow circle, hat lifted to the crowd, the smile of a man who already owned the headline. Local millionaire lifts town spirits, the kind you could frame over a fireplace and forget who'd been left outside in the cold. The auctioneer, pressed shirt, sky blue tie, strode to the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Charity Day showpiece. 1 lap around the outer rail. No whips. Start at the north gate. Finish at the banner. Ride with heart." He glanced toward Tommy, softer now. "Riders to the line." Tommy mounted. The leather creaked like a familiar prayer. Dusty shifted under him, then steadied when the boy laid a hand on his neck. In for 4. Hold for 2. Out for 4. The crowd's noise dimmed at the edges, as if someone had turned down the world. Earl's voice floated across the track. No heels, no hands, just breath. And the words landed like a bit of sky inside the boy's lungs. They trotted to the chalked stripe at the north gate. Vale drew up beside them, knee to knee. Up close, he smelled of cologne and victory, as if both came in bottles. He dropped his voice. "Here's your exit ramp, son. Nobody will blame you for backing out." Tommy set his jaw. "We didn't come for exits." "So you came for lessons," Vale said, smile tightening. "That's what pain is, boy. Tuition." He wheeled his stallion forward half a step, claiming ground because that was what he did with every living thing. The starter raised a small pistol. Tommy's breath sat perfectly in his chest, a bird calm in its own cage. He looked once toward the fence, Marla's hand pressed to her lips, Earl still as a mile marker, and then forward. Dusty's ear flicked back, catching the boy's breath, then clicked forward again toward the open curve of track. The shot cracked. Vale's stallion surged like lightning peeled from the sky. Dusty startled, then leapt, not with the stallion's violence, but with a kind of stubborn, rescued grace. The rail rushed by. The first turn came quick and shallow. Tommy eased his weight inside, hands still, knees breathing. Dusty's stride shortened across the curve, then lengthened into the back stretch where the ground lay truer and the wind pressed cool against their faces. The crowd found its voice. A single ribbon stretched thin and bright. "Go, kid!" someone shouted. "Run, Dusty!" Half a length became a length. Vale's horse moved like a machine that hated second place. The millionaire stole a glance, back, lips curving. Tommy didn't look at him at all. He kept his eyes on the space that belonged to them alone, the small, clean strip of dirt 3 strides ahead, where trust lived with no audience. A clod from the stallion's hind hooves hit Tommy's cheek. He tasted iron and kept breathing. Dust rose in veils, peeled open by hooves. Somewhere along the rail, a child's voice lifted, pure as a bell. "He can do it." The sun burned through thinning cloud. The rails threw sharp white lines onto the track. Midway down the backstretch, the stallion drifted a hair to the outside, then cut back in. Legal if you believed in technicalities, dirty if you believed in mercy. Dusty checked, found the step, okayed it with his ears. Tommy softened the reins, giving the horse room to think. They steadied, then hunted the rhythm again. 2 strides later, a hidden hoofprint, deep and dark from last night's storm, waited where the track looked even. Dusty's forefoot sank. The world tilted. Tommy felt the drop through his spine, an elevator falling between floors. He lifted. Instinct, practice, prayer, but the scarred leg folded anyway. Dusty's knee hit dirt with a sound that made the whole crowd swallow the next cheer in one gulp. The gelding stumbled forward, scrambling, chest close to the ground, hindquarters bunched like a spring trying to remember how to be a spring. Tommy pitched right. His boots skated in the stirrup. The reins burned across his palms. He did what Earl had drilled until it lived in muscle, dropped his weight back, opened his hands, gave the horse his head, said, "Easy, easy, I'm here without sound." The rail flashed a white warning in the corner of his eye. The stallion's iron shoes hammered past, Vale's gaze a brief, cold slice. Everything slowed. Dusty's good eye, amber, steady, caught the boys. In that gaze, Tommy saw a field from years ago, a rope dropped in trust, a first gallop that hadn't hurt. He felt the horse's question, "Are we falling, or are we remembering?" Dusty chose. He threw his head up, planted the good forefoot, and half leapt, half climbed out of the hole. Sand exploded from his knees. Tommy folded with the motion, ceding weight, letting the horse be heavier than gravity. The crowd made a sound that wasn't a gasp and wasn't a word. It was an intake of breath big enough to pull the clouds closer. They were moving again. Awkward, sideways, then straight. The scarred leg trembled, then steadied. Dusty took one short stride, then another, testing. Tommy let tears blur the world for a heartbeat, blinked them into the wind, and breathed the count that had brought them through mornings and moonlight. In for 4. Hold for 2. Out for 4. He lifted a hand, palm open over the withers, not touching, and felt the space between skin and air answer like a live wire. Silence spread down the rail the way shade spreads under a cloud. People stood without knowing they had. Hats lifted. Lips parted. Somewhere a phone jingle about the best credit card for cash back died under a hand. The announcer didn't speak. Even Vale, far ahead now, felt it. The way a man in a sealed room knows when the weather has changed. He looked back, a tiny glance that said, "Why aren't they cheering me?" Because something else mattered more. Tommy leaned lower, not to make Dusty faster, but to make himself smaller. "Only if you want," he whispered, mouth close to the horse's mane. "Only if it doesn't hurt." The gelding flicked an ear, then stretched his neck, asking for rain, asking for room. The scarred leg found a smoother piece of earth and laid a braver print. They hit the last turn 20 lengths down. It didn't feel like failure. It felt like standing up in church when the hymn catches you by the ribs. Earl's hat came off his head without his hands touching it. Marla's cry cracked open into a laugh that had salt in it and sunlight. The wind swung and carried the smell of wet creosote through the stands. Dusty's stride lengthened by inches, then inches again. Each step said, yes. Each breath said, still yes. The banner at the far end of the world snapped once, a white mouth waiting. Tommy didn't lift the reins or kick or pray out loud. He offered his breath and his trust and the space of one boy's small body not trying to own anything. He felt the horse grow taller under him, not stronger exactly, but truer. And that was when the crowd finally lost its language. They didn't cheer or clap. They simply stood, a whole town held by the sight of a hurt thing choosing to run anyway, not for glory, not for money, but because the ground had offered forgiveness. At the head of the stretch, the stallion thundered toward the banner alone. Behind him, a boy and a mended horse came out of the turn into light. Dusty took one last testing step, then, without being asked, gathered himself. Tommy breathed in. The gelding answered, and Sierra Vista forgot how to make a sound. The world seemed to hold its breath. Every sound, every color, Every heartbeat in Sierra Vista waited on the rhythm of a single horse that should not have been able to stand. The announcer's mic hung loose at his side. Even Vale's stallion, far ahead, flicked an ear at the silence chasing him. Dusty's sides heaved, his chest soaked with sweat that turned his coat the color of iron in the sun. Tommy leaned forward, forehead against the mane, whispering nothing words, the kind that come when faith replaces speech. Then Dusty began to move again. Not a desperate gallop, but a deliberate, steady run, like each stride was an act of forgiveness. The crowd's hush followed him as he found his rhythm. 4, 2, 4. The cadence that had been carved into their bones during training. Tommy didn't urge him on, he simply rode the wind that rose from the track. The gelding stretched into it, the scarred leg no longer leading but following, balanced by will alone. Ahead, Vale's stallion thundered toward the last quarter mile, mane whipping like black fire. The millionaire turned in the saddle, expecting to see distance, a victory he could already spend. What he saw instead was motion. A gray shape shaking the horizon. A boy bent low, as if carved into the horse's back. Vale blinked once, then twice. "Impossible," he hissed, tightening the reins. The track curved, dipping toward the outer rail where the dust gathered in thin drifts. Tommy could feel Dusty's lungs pulling deep, each inhale a promise, each exhale a song. The boy whispered, "You're choosing this, not me." The horse flicked his ears, then lifted his stride a heartbeat faster. They ate the ground. 10 lengths. 8. 6. The roar of the crowd began to return, not in cheers, but in a low wave of awe. Phones rose like pale lanterns. People filmed without remembering why. For the first time, Vale's rhythm faltered. He pressed his heels in, striking his stallion's sides. The black horse leapt forward, obedient but uncertain, glancing sideways as the sound behind him grew louder. "Run, Dusty," Tommy breathed. "Not for them, for you." Dusty answered with speed born of something that can't be trained: defiance, gratitude, memory. His mane slapped the boy's cheek. The reins went slack. They were no longer two beings, but a single motion streaking through the storm of light and dust. Marla clutched the railing, tears streaming. Earl stood with both hands on the fence, whispering, "Atta boy, just listen." They flew down the stretch, and with every pounding stride, the world widened. The banners blurred, the tents melted into color, and the sound of hooves became a heartbeat the town could feel beneath its boots. Vale hunched lower, eyes narrow, sweat streaking his temples. He shouted at his horse, but the animal flinched from the anger, stumbling for half a second. It was enough. Dusty drew even. For one suspended breath, millionaire and orphan raced side by side. 2 lives separated by money, bound by the same wind. Vale glanced left, meeting Tommy's eyes. In them he saw no hatred, only quiet conviction that broke something in him. He pulled the reins harder, desperate to reassert control, but his stallion fought the bit, ears flat, stride breaking under the tension. Tommy reached forward, palm open, and laid it gently against Dusty's neck. "Easy," he whispered. "He's already beaten." Dusty surged one final time, not in defiance, but in grace. They crossed the line exactly 1 step ahead, then stopped. Not skidded, not stumbled. Stopped, clean and deliberate. Dust settled around them like gold ash. The crowd erupted, but it sounded distant to Tommy, as if the noise were coming from another world. All he could hear was Dusty's breathing, steady and strong. Vale pulled up beside them, chest heaving. His stallion tossed its head, angry at the bit. The millionaire's face was gray, his mouth working soundlessly. For a moment, Tommy thought he might yell. Instead, Vale simply stared at the horse that had once been his, a horse he'd broken and thrown away, and saw what it looked like when something refused to stay broken. The announcer found his voice at last. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice cracked. "The winner, Tommy Reed and Dusty." The stands exploded. Marla's cry cut through the thunder. "You did it, baby!" Earl laughed until he coughed, slapping the fence rail. Dusty stood still amid the chaos, ears flicking, tail swishing lazily. Tommy slid off and pressed his forehead to the horse's neck. "You did it," he murmured. "You remembered." Cameras flashed. The mayor clapped Vale's shoulder, offering polite sympathy. Reporters shouted questions. But the boy and the horse didn't move. The world could wait. For a long, quiet moment, Tommy simply breathed with him. In for 4, hold for 2, out for 4. The rhythm of faith itself. Finally, Vale dismounted. He walked toward them, each step heavy with pride swallowing itself. The crowd went silent again, uncertain whether to boo or pray. The man stopped an arm's length away, his hat still in his hand. For the first time, his voice carried no echo of money. "He was always meant to run free," he said. Tommy nodded. "You just never gave him the chance." Vale looked down. "No," he admitted. "I didn't." He turned to the audience, voice rough. "You all saw what I saw. That horse taught me something I forgot a long time ago." He looked back at Tommy. "You won't need the prize money, kid. You already own what matters." He held out the reins of his stallion. "Sell him. Feed your dream. That's your real trophy." Tommy shook his head. "I don't need another horse, sir. I just needed you to see this one." Something in Vale's face cracked, then softened. He nodded once and walked away, the crowd parting around him. Earl joined Tommy, eyes glinting like water in old rock. "Told you it'd feel like flying," he said. Tommy smiled. "It did. And now? Now it feels like coming home." Dusty turned his head toward the cheering crowd, ears twitching at the sound. The setting sun caught in his mane, turning it molten. For a heartbeat, time folded. The past, the pain, the promise. And the horse that no one believed in became the symbol of everything the town forgot. Dignity, faith, and the courage to keep running when there's no guarantee of finish lines. As they walked a victory lap, petals and dust mixed in the air. Marla reached for her son, pulling him into an embrace that smelled of hay and tears. "You made him proud," she whispered. Tommy glanced at the horse beside them. "He made us all proud." And as the sun dipped behind the hills, the town of Sierra Vista, once noisy, cruel, and divided, stood united in silence again. Not out of disbelief this time, but reverence. For the first time, in years, the boy felt weightless, his heart riding the wind. Dusty lifted his head toward the reddening sky, and for both of them, Faith had finally learned how to run. The sun hung low, turning the world to bronze. Dusty's mane glowed in the afterlight, his breath still steaming from the run. Around them, Sierra Vista hummed with applause that refused to end, a kind of collective heartbeat pulsing through the rails. But inside that thunder of voices, Tommy heard only the quiet between breaths, the sound of peace finally landing. Earl reached him first, pushing through the crowd. The old man's face was wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. "You did it, boy," he said, voice thick. "Not just the race. You gave him back his name." Tommy looked at Dusty, who stood still, chest rising slowly. "He gave it back to himself," the boy said softly. Vale lingered by the winner's circle, hat still in his hand. His posture was straight, but something had broken inside the lines of his face. Reporters circled him like buzzards around a truth, shouting questions about charity, redemption, and public image management. He waved them off, ignoring the microphones. For the first time, the man looked smaller than the story around him. Tommy and Dusty stepped into the center of the field. The announcer approached, his voice trembling with excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen, our champion, Tommy Reed and Dusty, the horse that captured the heart of a town." The crowd rose again, cheering, stamping, waving hats. But Tommy didn't raise his arms or bow. He only turned to the horse beside him and whispered, "This is your applause, buddy. Take it." Dusty lifted his head high, ears pricked, nostrils flaring at the scent of hundreds of people who'd once doubted him. Then, in a gesture no one expected, he took one step forward and lowered both knees in the dirt. A bow. Slow, deliberate, untrained. The stands went silent, as though the air itself froze. For a second, no one moved. Then the sound of hands began. Soft, tentative, before it swelled into a wave that crashed over them. People cried openly. Earl removed his hat. Even Vale blinked hard, his jaw tight. Tommy knelt beside the horse, resting his forehead against Dusty's. "You did this," he murmured. "You showed them." The mayor approached, holding a small trophy and an envelope. "Son," he said, "on behalf of Sierra Vista, we present—" Tommy held up a hand. "Keep the money for the children's home. That's what this was about, right?" He smiled, shy, but certain. "Dusty's already paid me in full." The mayor blinked, then nodded. "You've got a good heart, kid." Earl chuckled behind him. "He's got a better teacher." Vale stepped forward at last. The crowd parted instinctively. He stopped a few feet from Tommy, the golden dirt swirling around his boots. "You could have taken that prize," he said quietly. "I didn't come for a sick prize," Tommy answered. "I came so he could finish what you started." The millionaire's gaze drifted to the horse, this creature he'd once dismissed as worthless. Dusty's eye met his, calm and steady. Vale swallowed, then reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a brass nameplate, dulled by age. "I kept this," he said, holding it out. "Stormline. It used to hang on his stall door." Tommy hesitated, then took it. The metal was warm from the man's hand. "Thank you," he said simply. Vale nodded, his voice lower now. "No, thank you. You reminded me that everything I thought I owned was borrowed." He looked toward the crowd, toward the children pressing against the rails. "Maybe it's time I gave some of it back." A ripple of applause rose again, softer this time, more human. Earl put an arm around Tommy's shoulders. "Come on, champ. Let's take him home." As they walked toward the gate, a reporter caught up with them, notebook in hand. "Tommy, one question. What's next for you and Dusty? Are you planning sponsorships, maybe a horse training business? You could be on TV." The boy smiled politely. "We're planning breakfast," he said, "and maybe a nap." Laughter rolled through the crowd. The tension broke. The boy led Dusty through the archway where the golden light softened into evening. Behind them, Vale stood alone in the ring. He looked down at the dirt and saw two sets of prints, one of wealth, one of grace, crossing paths before vanishing together. Outside the arena, Marla waited, her apron still dusty from the morning chores. When she saw them, she ran forward, tears streaking her face. "You did it!" she cried, hugging Tommy so tightly he could barely breathe. "We did it," he corrected, smiling through the dust. Earl cleared his throat, eyes glinting. "Ma'am, your boy and that horse just gave this town back its soul." Marla laughed, shaking her head. "I'll settle for knowing the mortgage can wait another month." They led Dusty to the water trough. The horse lowered his head, drinking slow, ripples bending the reflection of the setting sun. Tommy rubbed the scar on his leg gently, whispering, "You beat it, huh?" Dusty blew a breath through his nose, splattering the boy with drops that glimmered like tiny mirrors. Nearby, Vale's black stallion stood quietly, riderless. For a moment, Dusty looked toward him, not with rivalry, but with recognition. The two horses touched noses briefly, then turned away. Earl leaned on the fence, voice low. "Funny thing about pride. It keeps you from bowing until life knocks you to your knees. That horse did both, and look what it gave him back." The sky shifted from gold to rose. Tommy slipped the brass plate into his pocket. "Stormline," he whispered. "Dusty suits you better now. Storms end. Dust stays." Marla touched his shoulder. "Let's go home." They walked back toward the truck, this desert glowing behind them. The wind carried laughter, music, the fading echo of applause. Dusty followed, limping only slightly, but with the dignity of something eternal. As they reached the gate, Tommy turned for one last look. Vale was still standing alone in the ring, the crowd thinning around him. Then, almost shyly, the man removed his hat and bowed toward the boy and the horse. Tommy didn't wave. He simply smiled, the gesture small and real, before leading Dusty down the road where the sky met the earth in one long promise. The dust rose around them, glowing like memory in the twilight. And somewhere behind that glow, a town remembered what respect looked like when it finally learned to bow. A year passed, and Sierra Vista was no longer the same town. The dust still blew across Main Street, and the sunsets still burned red behind the hills, but something in its heart had shifted. The old auction yard, once a stage for pride and mockery, had become a quiet arena where laughter sounded different, softer, cleaner. The wooden fence now carried a bronze plaque. In honor of Dusty, the horse that taught a town to respect. Every Saturday morning, a small pickup rumbled down the dirt road toward that field. Tommy sat in the driver's seat now. Taller, but still lean, a touch of stubble shadowing his jaw. The passenger seat held a bag of carrots and a worn bridle, and in the trailer behind, Dusty moved with the slow, confident rhythm of a creature at peace. Marla watched from the porch as they passed, a mug of coffee warming her hands. Her back still ached sometimes, but she smiled more easily these days. The mortgage letters had stopped coming, partly because Vale had quietly paid them off in the name of community restoration, partly because Tommy refused to give up. He had started a small program at the town's children's home, teaching kids to groom, ride, and listen. He called it Hearts in the Dust. The mayor called it good PR. But the children called it freedom. Earl had become a fixture there too, shuffling in every morning before the sun burned the chill away. "Don't call me Coach," he'd growl, but the kids did anyway. His laugh had returned, hoarse, contagious, alive. Sometimes, when Tommy was busy fixing tack or adjusting stirrups, Earl would stand at the rail and whisper to Dusty like an old friend. "Told you we'd make it right, boy," he'd say, rubbing the scar on the horse's leg. "Took us long enough." The horse's limp was nearly gone now. He carried children carefully, his gait steady as water flowing around rocks. Each time one of them lost balance, Dusty adjusted on his own, keeping them safe without command. The adults said it was training. Tommy knew it was something else, an understanding born of pain, patience, and love. One morning, Vale appeared at the edge of the paddock. His clothes were simpler now, denim shirt, worn boots, and there was no entourage trailing behind him. The side. Children stopped what they were doing, whispering. Tommy spotted him and approached, brushing straw from his jeans. "Mr. Vale," he said, not unkindly. "Just Richard," the man replied. His eyes moved to Dusty, then to the kids laughing nearby. "You built something here." "We did," Tommy corrected. "All of us." Vale nodded, eyes moist with the kind of humility that comes late but true. "I'm funding a youth scholarship," he said quietly. "Equine therapy, community work, whatever you think helps kids like these find their voice. Consider it a partnership." Tommy studied him for a long moment. "As long as it's about them, not headlines." Vale smiled faintly. "I've had enough headlines to last a lifetime." They shook hands. The gesture was simple, unpublicized, but it carried the weight of redemption. Behind them, Dusty whickered softly, stamping once as if sealing the promise. Later that afternoon, the sky turned a hazy gold. The children gathered in a circle, watching as Tommy unsaddled Dusty for the day. The horse flicked his tail, enjoying the soft chatter. A little girl named Sarah, barefoot, hair tangled like tumbleweed, ran forward holding a carrot. "For you, Dusty," she said. He took it gently, lips brushing her palm. She giggled and hugged his neck. Earl leaned against the fence. "Look at that," he murmured. "Didn't even flinch. Used to take 3 men to touch him." Tommy smiled. "He's teaching them the way he taught us." Quietly. As evening settled, the children drifted home. The ranch grew still. Tommy led Dusty out to the open pasture where the desert met the hills. The horse paused at the gate, ears perked toward the fading sun. The sky flared orange, the same color it had been the day of the race. Tommy slipped the halter off and whispered, "Go on." For a moment, Dusty stood motionless. Then he trotted forward, the gait smooth, almost young again. The wind caught his mane, tossing it like smoke. He circled once, twice, then galloped up the ridge. Tommy followed him with his eyes, heart swelling. On the crest, the horse stopped and turned, outlined against the sun, a silhouette both ghost and glory. Earl joined him at the fence. "He's still running," the old man said. "Yeah," Tommy replied, "but now he's not running away." Vale arrived quietly behind them, watching. "You know," he said, voice low, "that day when he bowed, I thought it was surrender. Took me a while to see it was gratitude." Tommy nodded, his voice soft. We all bow to something, Mr. Vale. Some just learn later than others. They stood in silence as the wind moved through the grass, bending it in waves. The air smelled of sage and rain, the same scent that had followed the storm a year ago. It was the smell of beginnings disguised as endings. As twilight deepened, Tommy returned to the small barn. On the wall hung a framed photograph. Him and Dusty crossing the finish line, the crowd blurred behind them. Below it, carved into a wooden plaque, were the words, "Respect isn't given, it's earned. One step, one scar, one heart at a time." Marla entered, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You've made him proud," she said, handing one to her son. Tommy smiled, looking at the horse grazing outside. "He made me better." The crickets started their nightly hymn, filling the quiet. Tommy set the cup down and walked out into the field. Dusty lifted his head as he approached. The boy pressed his forehead to the horse's cheek, breathing the old rhythm. In for 4, hold for 2, out for 4. The gelding breathed with him, a sound soft as forgiveness. Overhead, stars began to appear, bright, endless, patient. The desert exhaled. And in that perfect stillness, the boy and the horse stood together, not as survivor and savior, but as equals. 2 souls that had carried each other out of darkness. The wind shifted again, rustling through the grass, whispering through the rails of the empty arena. Somewhere in that sound, Sierra Vista remembered. A horse had once bowed here. A boy had once believed. And a town had learned to stand. If this story touched your heart, tell me what part stayed with you most. Drop a simple comment, even just a heart, to let me know you were here. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because the next story might be the one that brings you to tears again, in the best way possible.